Hi there guys, it's Mike from MCQ Bushcraft here, and welcome to another episode of Bushcraft Basics. In the last two episodes of Bushcraft Basics we started to look into firelighting skills, and we had a look at the ferrocerium rod, specifically a couple of the different composites you can find out there, the techniques that go well with them. And we had a brief look at some of the tinders that you can find typically in the northern hemisphere, how they operate in different weather conditions, and some of the techniques that go with them. We're in a coniferous woodland today, and this woodland stretches on for quite a distance, and we have a lot of conifers here really blocking out the sunlight. There's not a lot of resources on the ground, and that's fairly typical for a coniferous woodland. And sometimes when you're in coniferous woodlands you can get a little bit of a feeling that they're quite sparse of resources, but that's quite the opposite really. There's actually a lot of resources around here that you can use. They're fantastic for shelter building, and there's a lot of resources for firelighting, which is what we're going to start to explore today. We're actually going to go out in the field in the next few episodes, start to gather resources and put them away for when we start to actually make a fire. And one of the great resources that you can find in coniferous woodlands like this is fatwood, and it's a term used a lot in bushcraft. And fatwood is basically wood infused with resin, and because conifers are full of resin that's very flammable, and it's been used as a resource for thousands of years really, it's very, very useful. You can often find downed trees in woodlands like this that harbour a lot of fatwood, and even stumps as well. And if you look on the ground around me, you'll see a lot of downed trees in this woodland, young and old, and they have branches and limbs poking out of them that have dried out, and those limbs can harbour a lot of fatwood. So that's really what I keep my eyes peeled for when I'm walking through woodlands like this, and I need to make a fire, and I've really just got the tools on my belt and in my pack and no resources with me. So let's take a look around and have a look at what we can find. So just a short walk from where we were a moment ago, and we found a downed spruce tree. And this one's been down for some time. It's not particularly old, but it's really going to be ideal for what we're looking for today. At first glance, or from touching it, the wood is saturated, it's really wet, and you can pick it out with your fingers very easily, and that's what's referred to as punk wood. When wood is so rotten, it's very punky, like polystyrene, it can be pulled apart. And that's not particularly a problem with this resource or what we need to gather today, or even the method in which we need to make a fire with this actual resource itself. If you're familiar with the British Isles, it rains here for almost the larger percentage of the year, and if you can't make a fire in wet weather, then really you can't make a fire at all in this country. If you live here and you practice bushcraft skills, then making a fire in the rain will be second nature to you, and you should be able to operate with the resources around you quite easily. And with this particular resource, the wetter and more rotten the piece of wood, the better when it comes to gathering it. And there's some good logic behind that. The fatwood itself, in the core of the wood, will keep out all of the moisture and it won't rot. And when you take it out, it'll be like a stabilised piece of wood that's been filled with glue, and it won't be rotten at all. And because of that, you want the wood around it to be as easy as possible to remove so you can get to that resource. So when a tree like this has been weathered very quickly by torrential rain over many, many months, it means that you can just pick away the wood very easily and take out that fatwood core with minimal effort and the minimal use of your tools. If any of you are familiar with rotten trunks in the ground in very torrential environments, when you're looking for fatwood, you can literally just pull the wood away with your hands and claw out the piece of fatwood or a root that you're looking for that's infused with it, with zero effort at all. Whereas in a drier climate where the wood is quite seasoned, you'll need to get your axe out and you need to hack against it or cut it with a saw. So wet weather can work in your favour with this method of gathering the resource, and even with the firelighting as well, because it is a resource designed to be used in wet weather, but obviously in dry weather it's much easier. But let's have a look at this branch here and see whether we can get some fatwood out of it. On this particular limb here, the area in which there will be the most fatwood is closest to the actual trunk, and that's the case for most limbs. You generally get a build up there at that join, and if you take that as close to the actual trunk as possible, you'll maximise on the resource you're looking for. We can take this in a number of ways. If it was rotten enough, we could kick it off with our feet, and it often breaks out in like almost like a join just here. Or we can get a saw or an axe and cut it, and that's what I'm going to do. That has got an incredibly strong smell and a very, very deep colour, deep red, and that's really a great sign. If you cut a limb off and it looks like that, and you are out exploring the wilderness and you're travelling and you're looking for a reliable tinder, take advantage of the entire tree. Have a look at all the limbs and gather some material, because you can always keep it for later on for future trips or expeditions. It's a really good resource for wet or dry weather. If it works in wet weather, it works in dry weather, and that's very typical of all fire lighting techniques. So what we're going to do with this now is actually cut it just here, because the fatwood won't really be particularly good further up the trunk, or up the limb, sorry. So we'll cut it there, we'll take about a foot away, and we'll start processing it down, taking the bark off, taking away the actual wet material on the outside and just leaving the hard fatwood. But if you do take a limb off and it's very white, and there's only a tiny red dot in the centre, the whiter the colour, the less fatwood you have basically, and you want to move on to another limb, because the resin content won't be particularly high, especially in the damp when that wood will actually take on moisture. But let's have a look at this limb. That's looking pretty good. But I think what we're going to do now is split it in half and then quarter it, so we actually have a decent corner to scrape the back of our knife on, and it will refine the wood a bit more, get rid of the damper outside, and you can get to the dry core where the best fatwood will be. So now that we've split these down, the smell becomes even stronger, and you get to the dry, resinous wood in the core, which is quite red. And these can be put in your pack and used at any point. But if we just take the best one, which is this one here, this is the reddest, we're just going to scrape it with the back of our knife into a pile on top of this fallen tree here. I'm just going to demonstrate to you how useful this actually is, even after months and months of rain. We've just come out here, found a dead tree, taken a limb straight off, and it can be used as a resource with a ferrocerium rod very easily. Once you've got a small pile just like that, you can take your ferro rod, and this is a hard composite as we talked about, so technique differs slightly. Drive some sparks in, and you have a fire. And then other material around it, such as a fire feather for example, would then turn that into a fire, even small twigs. You may ask why we're not actually making a fire at this point in the training series, and that's because there are many other dynamics that come into play. We're actually building a proper fire. For example, the type of environment you're in. We're in a coniferous woodland now. It's much more hazardous to build a fire in this environment than it is in a deciduous environment. Or if it's very windy and dry in a deciduous environment with a lot of leaf litter, that is an absolute hazard as well. And you can very easily start a ground fire quite quickly in that respect. So those are things we're going to come to later down the line. We're really just building up a very strong background knowledge at the moment, so when we actually come to build a fire, you understand all the finer points of what's involved why it might be successful, what weather conditions you're in, and you can put all of these things into practice when you actually build one. But this is just really a very simple resource. Fatwood is very easy to find even in the worst of conditions, and it can be really the saving grace of making a fire if the weather isn't particularly good for you. But there are many ways of gathering it. You can actually dig down into the rotten trunks and pull out the sap root of the actual tree, which is a large core of fatwood, and that's still used as a commodity in different parts of the world today. If you look at the description below this video, you'll see 3 other videos on fatwood, which I urge you to watch if you're interested in fatwood. We won't be covering them in that much detail in the Bushcraft Basics series. This is more of an overview, and I have other videos to back that up, and there's no point recovering that kind of information. So do check the description if you're interested in other fatwood videos. But in next week's video we will be looking at other resources, and we'll actually cover feathering as a technique, because it can greatly assist fatwood and other tinders as well if you need to feather. So we'll talk all about that in the next episode. Thanks again for watching, guys. Please see the links in the description, and I'll see you very soon in another video. Take care. Thanks again.